So Michelle, Managing Editor, American Purpose, thank you very much. Welcome, I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. We have a terrific conversation set up for today, 45 minutes, hard stop, 45 minutes past the hour. If you're in East Coast time zone, that's 12:45. Sorry that we're beginning just a couple minutes late, that's my fault. Welcome, Congressman Ro Khanna. You don't need an introduction, but I'm going to give you a brief one. You're an academic, a lawyer. You served in the Obama administration in the Commerce Department. You represent California's 17th district, and you have a lot to say about this digital age governance, and I'm going to say ethics and equities. You have a new book out, and we congratulate you on that. We want to hear about that. But my job is now to step aside and ask Patrick Chamrell, our friend, colleague from Stanford, member of our editorial board, to scene set in 60 seconds. Patrick then will turn it over to Stephen Hill, a regular American Purpose contributor, a splendid public intellectual and writer on these topics. He'll interview you, Congressman. He'll open it up for questions, and we'll be done right around 12:45 Eastern. Thank you and welcome everybody. And Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jeff. So before I introduce Stephen, I just wanted to add to what you just said about Congressman Khanna, Jeff, that he used to teach at Stanford, where I teach myself. I'm a political scientist at Stanford, in addition, of course, to being a member of the editorial board of American Purpose. And I wanted to thank Gio Saba, his chief of staff, for making this event possible. It was very helpful, and I had met him here at Stanford in Washington when he was a student here. Now, about Stephen Hill, he seems to have the perfect, we know he has the perfect background to engage with you, Congressman, since he spent most of his professional life reflecting and writing about the connection between technology and democracy, publishing 7 books in the process. So I'm going to give the floor now to Stephen, and we are very eager to listen to what you have to say, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Jeff. It's a great pleasure to be here, Congressman Khanna. You almost represent my district. I'm in San Francisco, so a lot to talk about. Let's get into it. First, I just want to commend you on a very impressive book. The breadth and scope of it, both in describing the problems of how we've sort of lost the promise of the internet. If you think about how the internet began with great elation, and this is going to open up so many worlds for so many people all over the world. And of course, it has managed to do that. But it's now, as we've seen, it's come with its downside. So the question is, how do you kind of rein it in? And so your book is very much focused on that. And you've put together a number of proposals in it. The book also, I should say, for our listeners, it's also talks a little bit about Congressman Khanna's impressive life and how, how he's become a success in this world as the immigrant experience. There's all sorts of very impressive, interesting angles in the book. But I'm going to focus in particular on the substance of your book as I see it, and what you're bringing to the table for discussion here, Congressman Khanna. The thing I was impressed to see the list of influences you have there, from Jürgen Habermas, the German sociologist, John Rawls, Martha Nussbaum, Amartya Sen, my former colleague at New America, Michael Lind. Many people you are drawing from in terms of your intellectual influences in trying to think about the broader framework for the digital age. And I think that's a strength of the book. In terms of the proposals, I'm just going to enumerate some of them for our audience, because I don't think we'll have time to get to them all. But I think people should be aware of some of the things that you've put into this. You've talked about how do we take, instead of having just a handful of cities that are benefiting from the creation of this technology, how do we distribute that to rural areas? And you cite in the book the case of Alex, a former construction worker and small businessman in Eastern Kentucky, lost his business. And then you were able to, then a program came in to help to retrain him as a computer programmer. And so your thought is, well, why can't we do this en masse at scale? And then one of your ideas about how to implement such an idea is to take the old FDR idea of land grant colleges and universities and create digital colleges where the training will happen at these land grant universities. We don't have to create new infrastructure. The infrastructure already exists. It just needs money, focus, and a plan. You also talk about, as you have in the past, your Internet Bill of Rights idea, 10 different components to that Bill of Rights, as with the ancient Bill of Rights, and the opt-in for data gathering of our data. Should we be able to not give our data over to these companies? You also talk about alternatives to social media. Shouldn't there be multiple platforms, some of them perhaps even receiving government funding to get them going? You talk about an antitrust intervention, common carrier. You have something called an Essential Workers Bill of Rights, and how do you enact a safety net for them? You even, in a one point, call for German-style co-determination, worker-elected boards of directors, partially worker-elected boards of directors, and works council. So the breadth of it is really quite impressive. So I now that I've laid that out, which of these are you finding are most of interest for you to talk about as you go around talking about your book in various media outlets, and which of these might have traction in Congress?
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, Patrick, and Stephen. Thank you for that excellent summary. As you were listing them all, I said, wow, it probably went on too long, the book. Could have focused more, but I appreciate your reading it so carefully. You know, I think that the story in this country is one of extraordinary wealth generation in certain places with certain people, my district being one of them, $11 trillion a market cap, and the vast deindustrialization of large parts of the country where we shipped our production offshore, where people have been denied the opportunity to stay in their towns, stay in their communities, and produce wealth and have a means of making a dignified living. And that is one of the central challenges that the book takes on, is how do we produce value across our country again? How do we take on this deindustrialization that has happened and left so many places behind? And why that matters. I mean, obviously people are free to move, and that's part of our ambition, but it shouldn't be that people are talking about a brain drain in the United States. It shouldn't be that you can't stay in your community and have economic fulfillment and have a life that is adding value and adding meaning. And the decentralization of technology is one of the themes. And one of the things I struggle with is, how do we describe these as not software coding jobs? How do we describe these as the new manufacturing jobs, the new jobs that people can relate to, that their grandparents and parents did, but that they have a new twist to it? And by the way, a lot of these jobs don't require a college degree. So one of the things I'd love to get people's opinion on this call, you know, I was in Galesburg, Illinois, where the Maytag factory plant went down to Mexico back in 2003, 5,000 jobs lost. People talked about how they knew everyone in that plant. They celebrated Christmas together. They knew if someone had a family member who was sick. The loss of that plant wasn't just the destruction of jobs, destruction of opportunity, it was a destruction of community. And I was there speaking in Monmouth College, and someone said to me, you know, President Obama came here before he ran for the Senate, and he spoke about Galesburg eloquently in his famous 2004 keynote speech. Since then, presidents have come and gone, Congresses have come and gone, nothing has changed. Our community continues to bleed jobs. Our kids are still leaving. There's no economic revitalization. I called up Sundar and Shiv at Google and said, can we do something? And they did something meaningful, but on a small scale. They've created 20 jobs, or working with Carl Sandburg Community College. They're going to pay a $5,000 stipend. These kids are going to get an 18-month course, 10 hours supplemented to community college, and they're going to have a $65,000 job at the end of it. The question, in my view, is what more can we do to revitalize places like Galesburg? How do we get things like Google's partnership with Sandburg College to scale, or are there other models? But it seems to me that is a fundamental challenge facing the country and frankly, the Western democracies.
Well, let's drill down on that a little bit. Talk about one of your proposals. So, as I understand, and please fill it out for us, you're proposing that we have tech hubs around the country, not just the handful of cities that now benefit from it. You cite certain statistics that there's going to be 25 million tech jobs being created, and most of those are going to benefit just a handful of cities. And so you suggest, especially in this age of remote work, distributed work, why not have create incentives, federal incentives, you emphasize, to have the tech companies invest in these hubs around the country. That way, people, especially young people, don't have to move from those more rural areas to the handful of cities, and they can stay where they are. They can have good jobs, and they can contribute from where they are. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how you envision this might happen? And you talking about your digital land grant colleges and these sorts of ideas that you've put forward?
Sure. The tech hub, let's think of Intel going to Columbus. I mean, Columbus is an example of that. Government investment, it's in anticipation of the Semiconductor Chips Act and the Endless Frontiers Act that I've been involved with. They passed the Senate, passed the House. We're hoping to get it to the president's desk. Pat Gelsinger at Intel will tell you that's one of the main reasons he's investing in Ohio. It's going to create 7,000 jobs, and many in manufacturing, and some that'll require, of course, advanced computer science degrees, others that won't, that will require technical skill of some kind, but a credential. And it's going to create construction jobs and a whole economic multiplier effect. That is an example of a massive government investment in building new production in the university system, Ohio State, both state and federal, that is creating almost what Gelsinger calls a new patriotism, a new revitalization. And look, you can talk to Republicans in Ohio, and they speak about the excitement, the energy around around what's happening in Columbus. Now, the rural communities are harder because you can't put an Intel plant necessarily in every rural community. So I call it a hub and spoke model, that you could have some of these hubs, and then in these rural communities, you could still have people maybe commuting into a Columbus or a Cleveland, but doing some of the work which is possible remotely. And in some cases, they could even be working remote for companies out in Silicon Valley or New York. And then we need a massive investment in, I'd say, land grant universities as a start, but then also community colleges to provide these credentials, with two caveats: that it can't just be federal money, because a lot of these colleges have training programs, bluntly, that don't lead to actual employment. It has to be in collaboration with the private sector to get people credentialed so that they're actually going to have a job at the end of it. And in my view, there has to be some stipend for participating in it, particularly for people who may be older and at a stage where they're juggling a career or juggling a family. That should be done on scale, that you can have this new group of people credentialed doing these jobs, and then figuring out how to make those jobs relatable. So it's not coming in and saying, we're going to take people who used to do stuff with their hands and repair and tinker and make them into coders sitting behind a desk. But that a lot of these skills are still building and tinkering, but they're just doing so with new tools of technology.
Right. And so it seems like there's a lot of potential there. I'm wondering, and you do look at this a little bit in your book, so maybe you can talk about it. There's also downsides to this sort of, as we call it, distributed workforce. When people are spread out, they don't come to work, especially those who are working at home. It's harder to have group solidarity between them. It's harder to organize unions. It's there's a number of downsides that could come from this sort of increasing distributed workforce model, people working at home, people working remotely, and we're already seeing some of that. So, I mean, any thoughts on how to mitigate some of that to get the strengths of the model that you're proposing without some of the potential downsides?
There are definitely downsides. The strengths in part at its height, at its best, is you have people in maybe rural Ohio, though Columbus isn't rural, but they'll have some satellites that are rural, working with people in the Bay Area, working with people in Black and brown communities on distributed teams prospering together, and joint work, joint prosperity may help stitch some of the country together. The negatives are, some of these places may be seen as satellites, not essential to the work itself and not invested in the community. So if someone is working for a remote office, it's not clear that the company they're working for is going to feel invested in that local community in the way that a company organically grown would feel. It may be harder to have a voice. It may be harder to push back against a manager. It may be harder to organize. And so that's why it's so important to have rules that allow people basic respect, to basic organizational empowerment, so that they have a more structured voice, and so that there are workplace rules that you can't just have people work on Zoom screens the whole time, and it can be draining as people miss contact. I mean, so many people want that physical contact and want some hybrid model, which is why you probably need still hubs or places people can go into. I think the whole thing is to be explored. I guess my view is that remote work is here to stay. We might as well figure out how do we maximize it so you have interaction among people who are different and a distributed prosperity, and learn about what the harms are and try to minimize that.
Well, there's no question that the future of work is being drawn as we speak. So I'm wondering, have you had conversations that you can tell us about? Perhaps some of it might be confidential, with any of the larger tech companies who you would look to see if they are willing to invest in? What has been the response among them? Are they interested in that? Does it seem like they've got their hands full with other things, they don't want to be involved, or is somewhere in between?
Well, I think they certainly have seen that remote work has worked much better than they thought, and they were very reluctant earlier on, and they now see, well, you don't have to necessarily come to the office. In fact, I was recently back home at Google, and on the middle of a weekday, and one of the senior executives was sheepish, saying, "Yeah, we're still working," because the halls were all empty. I mean, no one was back at the office. Now, I think they would tell you that there's still a value in having people congregate. There's a value, particularly as social capital declines, of people who know each other. So if you have a team that starts out physically together and then it goes remote, that's easier than if you just have people who start remotely, that there's a value in some hybrid model. But I think that the tech companies have been pleasantly surprised by it. And of course, they're embracing now more this idea that they need more friends than just people in Silicon Valley to understand what they do. And it's in their self-interest to get other parts of the country invested in technology. The most prime example is defense, which has jobs and investment in almost every part of our country.
But do you think any of them are willing to invest in a significant hub of activity in a place like Eastern Kentucky?
Well, I think, look, Intel is doing it in Ohio with government incentives. I think what you see with these tech companies is they're doing it ad hoc in small places, some of the jobs programs I've helped with, but that's not what we need. We need it at massive scale. We need it in massive, almost rebuilding these areas. And I don't think that can be just these tech companies left to the market themselves. I think that has to be decisive federal support and intervention to do that. And that's where, and people here, some may disagree or agree. I think the unfettered sort of capitalism has had a challenge. I mean, yes, it created globalization. Yes, it created lower consumer prices. Yes, it helped lift millions of people around the world out of poverty, but it also shuttered communities. It shuttered plants. And we can't just rely on the market to sort out where the jobs and opportunities are going to be. We need government to partner, to direct industrial production in the United States and in places that have been left out.
And you portray this as part of what an overall vision of what you call progressive capitalism. So this is part of your vision. You also talk about things like partially worker elected boards of directors. You want to talk about how that fits in. So basically, you know, a place like Google or a place like Amazon, their workers would elect some of the members of the board of directors. For our audience who doesn't know, this is very common in Germany and Sweden and other places. It's part of what the broader program, what's called stakeholder capitalism, giving the stakeholders, all the stakeholders involved in a company more, if not direct decision-making power, more consultation power, people being able to be consulted more. So I'm curious how you see that fitting in with your vision of progressive capitalism, your vision of these hubs spread around the country, et cetera.
I think you summarized it exactly correctly. That's not an original idea. Cite other countries and thinkers who've called for this. And the idea is, look, you could today win the lottery and think about this and work for a multi-trillion-dollar company. And you still may have a life that is not economically secure and one that you're not fully happy with because you're only making 16, 17 bucks. You're having the only thing worse than a human boss is having an algorithm as a boss. You're maybe at doing tasks that don't give you a sense of purpose and fulfillment, which is different than some of the manufacturing jobs. And if you talk to people in the workers in manufacturing, many will argue it's union jobs, unions that made those jobs decent jobs, secure jobs, jobs where workers had a voice. You know, I am for increasing unionization, but beyond that, I think having workers take an affirmative role in companies where they are saying, okay, we're going to embrace this new technology, but how do we shape what the use of the technology should be? Where is the use excessive? Where is it something that's actually going to add value? How do we participate in the decision making? I think that gets more people bought in to the extraordinary wealth generation we have.
Okay, well, that's been really interesting. So, and then your book sort of shifts a little bit. Not that it's the next part that we'll talk about is unrelated to what we've been talking about, but then you sort of go into more about the digital platform companies and the social media companies in particular, and of course you previously had proposed your Internet Bill of Rights, and you have a full critique of these companies that you know, is pretty common among many experts who are looking at this, the data grabbing, the type of the way they use our data to manipulate us using targeted ads, all these sorts of things. So one of the ideas you put forward was that we should have an opt-in system instead of an opt-out system. Right now, you use these services and they take our data, and some of them allow you to opt out. If you live in California, where we've passed a law, you have more options there. But for the most part, it's a system where they take our data and that's the default. You're proposing that the system be where they don't take our data and they have to ask us if they can, and we have to opt in. I should note that the recent Apple iOS for the iPhone actually now has put that system in by default. So could you talk about this, your thoughts behind this, pros and cons, the reception in Silicon Valley to this? Facebook, of course, would not be happy about this. They're already very angry at Apple for making that the default in the Apple iPhone. So love to hear your thoughts in more detail.
Well, the privacy of Americans and citizens shouldn't be left to the whims of Tim Cook. I mean, I'm glad what Apple is doing, but we shouldn't have to have Apple architect that. And we need more than actually just opt-in consent, though that would be a good point. We need sort of what Jack Balkin calls a fiduciary duty of data minimization. And Jack Balkin's a professor of law at Yale. And the idea is that you shouldn't be collecting all this data other than the data that you need to perform the service. So, you know, some data you need. You may need my address to verify that it's my credit card, my information, but you don't need all this excess data. And what the excess data does is it allows people to create social profiles and model and target in a way that then has grown QAnon, has grown conspiracy theories online. And I don't think John Stuart Mill, when he talked about the free exchange of ideas, ever envisioned that would include bots multiplying certain ideas, or that it would include bots targeting their ideas with others. I think he envisioned a community where different people would have a voice, and then the stronger argument would win. So this argument of free speech absolutism, with the sense that it would lead to truth, is just wrong. And I think one of the points I make in the book, or that I try to make, people say, why do you cite all these philosophers? It is to, I describe my education at University of Chicago as simply, I went in thinking I was really smart, and I left realizing I wasn't nearly as smart as many people who came before me. And I think Silicon Valley needs to go through that education, that there are people who've been thinking about how do we get truth, how do we have rational conversation, how do we have meaningful conversation for generations, for centuries, penning thousands and thousands of pages like Habermas on those questions. And you come in and with these pithy sayings that we're going to have a platform and it's going to lead to world peace and truth, it's naive. And I think that's what's gotten them into trouble. So part of the book is saying, let's have some more humility in what we need to do in constructing these forums, and involve more thinkers in what that should look like.
Well, some of this could be a matter of product design. For example, the smartphone could be easily designed where you have a button where you turn your own data on and off. So the data is off and you need to summon a taxi. You turn your data on so they can find you geographically and pick you up, and then you turn it off. You want to order some food and have it delivered to you, you turn your data on. So is this something, do you think about, this kind of product design as a way to get at some of these nuances that seem, it seems like when you in Congress, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these issues are so huge that they can't figure out what to do. There's,
I agree with that. Yeah. Look, and it's hard to define some of the broader principles simply. So you may want to see targeted ads for the pizza place that are near Stanford, as opposed to seeing ads for pizza places in Washington, D.C. And that targeting may be fine, but you probably may not want to be targeted based on your race or religion. The European law, the Digital Services Act, I think tries to make these distinctions. I guess what I would argue is that you probably want to make a regulatory framework that says these types of targeting we want to ban, these types of targeting are permitted with consent, but then the implementation of that is in the design. But I don't think we want to leave all of the value choices just to the companies, because not that the companies are bad actors always. In some cases, they're good actors, but we want to have, in my view, a democratic decision making over those issues, not just what may be consistent with a particular company's values, or what may be consistent with a company's profit maximization, which is their ultimate charter.
And we're going to open up the questions in just a moment here, so please start getting ready to think about what your questions might be. Congressman Khanna, have you thought, and I didn't see anything in the book about it, so and perhaps I missed it, maybe it was a mention, but some people have talked about that some of these companies at least should be regulated as more on a utility model, that they are creating the new infrastructure for the digital age. And just as we, telephone companies and train airlines and these sorts of things are regulated like utilities, that there should be more of the guardrails around these companies so that we guide this new digital infrastructure, which is still in formation, in a way that is going to make sure it serves the public interest instead of just the profitability of these companies. Any thoughts about that?
I discussed that briefly in Chapter 6, and I reject the utility model, though I embrace the essential facilities doctrine model, which is basically to say, these companies should be required to allow all sellers on their platform, absent a seller being Parler or doing something outrageous and not consistent with their values. So you want to make sure that Amazon can't just say, well, Ro's critical of Jeff Bezos, I shouldn't have his book on my on my platform, and you want to make sure that they're not discriminating against sellers. But to turn them into utilities with a guaranteed return of profit, I think would be to ossify platforms that may not, that could face competition. I mean, there's a new search engine, Brave, that is talking about using tokens not to have have your data tracked. And I think what we want to do is have antitrust policy encourage new competitors not to have these things become ossified. I mean, bluntly, a lot of utilities you don't exactly think of the most innovative places. So
Right.
I think you want to continue the innovation.
Yeah, and you do mention that you'd like to see multiple platforms, and you even mentioned potential public funding for a platform. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I think the idea is that from a speech perspective, you want to see many different discursive places, and that could include places that have anger in the language of protest, and sometimes that may be fine and justified. You don't want to have everything censored to a conversation like this. This type of conversation maybe wouldn't meet the moment after George Floyd. But you do want to have places for conversations like this because rational, thoughtful exchange is important. It sort of was the ideal behind our Supreme Court, though one can argue whether that's really the paradigm. But when I read an essay where Rawls talked about what is sort of reflective equilibrium, he had the Supreme Court in mind, and so the idea that that is stuff that can be publicly funded to create like PBS is or of the internet, and they do that in Taiwan. Audrey Tang has been brilliant at it in getting people actually participating in deliberation that matters. Imagine if people could do that on gun violence and on different issues. Much harder to do in our country with many more people than Taiwan, but we ought to try.
Right, and when it's hard to get anything through the United States Senate is also a big challenge. So let's go to questions. We don't have a lot of time because we're trying to stop it right at 9:45. So please keep your questions short if you may. Patrick, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to address a different aspect of the of technology and its impact on politics. It's about access to internet and to even TV. What often is referred to as triple play. I've just noticed that the cost of these services in the United States is about, by my own calculation, about in average 7 or 8 times higher than it is in Europe. And I see those, and there are a few very dominant players in that market, and obviously this is very expensive for most families. And I was wondering if you thought that there would be some different kinds of regulations on those companies to make it more affordable now that these services are kind of utilities, as we just mentioned. And so what's your thought about this?
Patrick, I agree with you completely. And while I'm very proud of the president's infrastructure bill and American Rescue Plan that provided $60 to $70 billion to get high-speed broadband across the country, one of the failures of that, or one of the things that wasn't complete, is dealing with this issue that there are 4 basically big players monopolizing the market to provide internet service: Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, and I think we need legislation that would encourage more competition. I think the introduction of a public option is something that, if we funded more, would create some of that competition, and we probably need stronger regulation on these companies on the price. So we did a good job in providing funding for affordable broadband, but we haven't done enough to deal with the concentration of economic power within that industry.
Thank you so much. Larry Diamond.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Ro.
Hi, Larry.
Good to see you. Could you tell us where we are with the CHIPS Act now? I thought it was going to sail through, but now it seems to be in difficulty, and it's pretty important to the future vision you have of revitalizing American competitiveness for the high technology age. And more generally, what do you think about the ability politically to expand on this as a model for, if I can just put it bluntly, national industrial policy, because that's really what you're talking about when you're talking about a greater role for government in stimulating, facilitating, empowering, and in a way helping to steer capital into internationally competitive channels.
And if,
That's it, right.
in your response, if you could explain the CHIPS Act so that people know,
Yeah,
Larry, what you're
no.
saying.
So the CHIPS Act basically would provide $50 billion of funding to help create semiconductor plants in the United States. And the Endless Frontiers Act, which is part of it, would have massive investment in cutting edge research on the leading technologies, clean tech, biotech, synthetic biology, AI, quantum computing, and in the commercialization of that. It passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. I mean, think about McConnell and Schumer both voted for it. It's passed the House. It should have been on the president's desk about a year ago. Senator Schumer and I and Young and Gallagher have been working on this for 3 years, well before the president took office. The president ran on this, but it's caught up still in a disagreement. I support the Democratic position that we want trade adjustment assistance very strongly, but I don't think it should be caught up the disagreements with this bill. And so you have broader disagreements between Democrats and Republicans that are being negotiated that are tying up the bill getting to the president's desk. In terms of industrial policy, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I had an op-ed a few days ago in the New York Times, which wasn't an industrial policy, but basically saying the government should be out there much more aggressively buying fuel and food and selling it back to consumers at no cost, which we've done in the past. And you know, if you think oil is going to go up to $150 a barrel and $6 gas, you could do that at a significant level, more than the million barrels that the president's releasing. I mean, we consume 20 million a day, and that's on the side of stabilizing food and fuel. And then you could have the government much more active in both building the workforce and the capital to bring production back and high value jobs back. I actually believe, especially on the second, that that's one of the few areas of bipartisan possibility. You have Mike DeWine. Pat Gelsinger jokes that the headlines after DeWine won in Ohio should have been Gelsinger reelects DeWine, because he had every ad about what he was doing in to bring Intel. And Rubio and I are working on a big bill on massive federal funding for production. So it seems one of the few places, as the Competes Act also highlights, that you can actually find common ground in this country.
Thank you, Larry. Well, of all the really provocative, interesting ideas, are there any that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about now?
Well, I would just say I think the book ends with a chapter called Democratic Patriotism, which is heavily drawn on Frederick Douglass's speech, Composite Nation, about how to become a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. I'm struck by Douglass in 1869 saying he believes America is on the ascent. This is someone who was enslaved for 20 years, and he envisions basically people from all over the world coming to the United States and unified not just by a commitment to equality and liberty in our constitutional principles, but actually forming a common culture, what Du Bois calls being co-workers in the kingdom of culture and creating the culture. And it seems to me an important part of our task is to figure out how we do that, how we do something unprecedented. There has never been a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy in the world. Canada is still 85% white. Britain is the same. Australia is the same. We're 60% white, non-Hispanic. Our immigration has gone from 90% European in the 1960s to 10% European. We're trying to do something very, very difficult. And in addition to the economic questions, I think is a question of how we retain a sufficient amount of America while embracing new voices. And how to do that seems to me our generational challenge.
And when you talk about this with your colleagues in Congress, are they, do they embrace any of these ideas in your book? Will we see any of them turned into legislation anytime soon? If so, which ones? What's the sequencing? What's the priority?
Well, the Competes Act has the best shot of these tech hubs across the country. I do think we can get funding on the land grant universities, and especially if we tie it to concrete job outcomes. And I think the Internet Bill of Rights, many colleagues may agree with the principles, but it's the devil is in the details. On the sense of how we build a common American patriotism, common American culture, I think the sentiment is there among 90% of Congress wanting to do that. But we have the same difficulties as any American citizen. I have said that you could replace all of us in Congress, pick someone out of a phone book in the districts we represent, and you probably still have the same polarization, because it's not Congress that's polarized, it's the country that's polarized.
And what's your solution to that? It's a big question, but somebody's
Well,
got to
my
think of it.
solution, it starts with the economic decentralization, economic opportunity, because I think if we work together, prosper together, we create the conditions for a better understanding. But I think that this is going to take time. I think the 20s are going to be a very difficult decade, because again, I come to the sense of what we're trying to do is unprecedented. People are afraid. They want to play baseball. They don't want to play cricket all over America. And maybe some do, but and the question is, well, where can you play cricket? I mean, that's a shorthand version of capturing, I think, deeper questions about what is the American identity going to look like, and that's a difficult question.
Well, in that regard, because I know you're, you have ideas on many different issues beyond even what's in this book. In terms of how do we incorporate people politically, have you thought about other types of reforms, things like ranked choice voting, political reforms that might help the country to come together more instead of have elections being so polarizing? Is there a way to help people to integrate more and to find their sense of representation in the legislative bodies that are elected?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a sense of disempowerment right now, and that's because of gerrymandering. It's because of the influence of big money on politics. It's because of a lack of ranked choice voting. It's because people feel that their voicemails to Congress don't really matter in a way that they used to matter with showing up to a town hall. So we need fundamental democracy reform. But I'll end on this note. I think democracy is only as strong as the culture that underlies it. And I don't think programmatic legislative reforms can create a cultural framework of American patriotism. I think that is going to have to be in the difficult work of religious institutions, educational institutions, community institutions, to rebuild a civic culture and a patriotic culture that then also informs our politics. I mean, there's probably a mutual impact. The politics influences the culture influences the politics, but it's not, to me, as simple as just having legislative fixes.
Thank you so much, Congressman Khanna. Congressman Khanna has to leave a bit early for an interview, I think you said on Fox News, so good luck with that. And with that, Will, thank you so much for participating, and thank you to everyone else who participated.
Thank you.
Jeff or Patrick, are you going to end us, or how do we do this? I'm not sure. Okay.
No, I just wanted to thank Congressman Khanna again very much for this, and to thank you, Stephen, of course, for this very stimulating conversation. It's a very rich book, as you said, Stephen, and we are very lucky to have Ro tell us more about it today, and hopefully he can push some of his own ideas through the political process in the near future. So thank you so much to both of you, and have enjoy Fox News, Congressman Khanna.
Thanks to everyone. I think we'll just hit leave here. I think Michelle had to go, so I think we're supposed to just kind of end it because Michelle had to go. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Patrick.
No, that was good. We have a good sense of what's in the book, and it seems to be an extremely rich book. Yeah.
We'll see you again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.